just missed it, but the sun is setting just over there. So tonight we're going to change a cam belt and water pump on a Mk5 Ford Mondeo. So let's see what the time is, shall we? 8:30. We might just get finished by midnight. If I go back some months now, when I had to do my first Mk5 Mondeo 2 litre diesel cam belt replacement, I friggin' tried. I tried everywhere I could think of to try and get a flywheel timing pin, but nobody seemed to sell one. Hell, I even went down to our local Ford garage and asked to borrow theirs. It was, we don't have one either. But you know, seriously, I had a car there, I had to change the cam belt. I didn't have the timing pin for it, but I still got to change the cam belt. So out comes the old paint marker. You know what the funny thing is? I've changed so many of these cam belts now without using a timing pin that I don't even want a timing pin. I am perfectly happy to be using my trusty paint marker. But I will point out, the hole the flywheel timing pin goes in is behind the starter motor, and there is also a little plug in that hole that you have to remove the starter motor to remove the plug. So if you were in possession of a flywheel timing pin, it's still going to put another 30 to 45 minutes of extra time pissing around removing the starter motor. Anyway, most people watching this video will have a good idea of how to change a cam belt, and I will do my best to give you some handy tips on this particular car. However, if you've never changed a cam belt in your life and you want to have a pop at changing this one, seriously, don't bother. Trust it to an expert. Anyhow, enough talking. I'm going to go out and get this job done. I've removed the wheel and the inner wheel arch liner. You've got to take the wheel arch liner out to be able to get access to up underneath the engine bay. There's a rubber cover in the centre of the crankshaft pulley which you'll have to hook out. That's to stop the crankshaft bolt head from getting rusty. There's a tin plate on top of your fuel filter held in by 3 8mm screws, and move your tin plate out of the way. 13mm nut here holding an earth lead onto the engine mount. So remove that nut and remove the earth lead and just tuck the lead out of the way. Your wiring block that's attached to this bracket on your engine mount, if you pull that out of its holder, pull it off the rocker cover where it clips on, and just tuck this wiring loom well out of the way, and the rest of this wiring where it's all clipped to the fuel filter housing, it'd probably be a lot easier just to unclip it all and just move it all out of the way. Then your 13mm bolt holding this bracket, take that bracket right out of the way. I'm going to remove the engine mount off the car now, so rather than just put a metal trolley jack straight under the sump pan, which is plastic and you can crack it, if you use like a book or something a bit soft, then you've got less chance of damaging that plastic sump. Right, now I've put a little bit of weight on the trolley jack, I can remove the engine mount. So all we have on this engine mount are 3 18mm nuts and 2 15mm bolts. Now if you've got your engine at roughly about the level it should normally sit at, you can actually get this engine mount and you can kind of tip it towards you. Just be careful of any pipes. And the whole mount should wriggle out. Because the engine is in the car and I can't get the camera on all the angles I need, there is a wiring loom which runs down and is clipped onto this cover. So you'll just have to use your trim removal tool and just unclip the wiring loom. There's now 3 10mm bolts that are holding this top cover on which need to be removed. You can now pull this cover forward a little bit and it will literally just pull out of the side. Bingo. I'm going to remove the auxiliary belt. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's a 15mm spanner to detension it. And if you've got a little pin, you can actually put the pin in the tensioner when you've detensioned it and it will hold it in position. It's quite easy to remove the fan belt. On our camshaft sprocket, there's 2 holes, okay? The one we're interested in is the slotted hole, and that's the one we need to turn the engine over now to. This slotted hole is around about the 4 o'clock position. And I'm going to use this ordinary bolt with a 13mm head, pin our camshaft sprocket up. And once our slotted hole gets around about to the 4 o'clock position, I can fit our pin in there and just turn it slowly until it dogs in. And that's it, we're in. Just make sure that bolt is a nice sliding fit all the way through the pulley and into the cylinder head. So now we have our camshaft pulley pinned up, we can put a paint mark on the tooth of the ring gear here, put another paint mark just on the gearbox casing. Right, before I undo the crankshaft pulley bolt, I'm just going to remove this bolt, because we'll time this back up again in a minute. Okay, so just to recap, our paint marks on our flywheel and engine casing are lined up, and our pin on our camshaft sprocket is lined up. So we know our timing's good. We're now going to undo the crankshaft pulley bolt. Right, at this point, you really do need to pay attention, because we are not going to put our air gun on that pulley bolt and just undo it. For whatever reason, Ford, in all their wisdom, have decided to put an absolute obscene amount of thread lock on the crankshaft pulley bolt threads. Number one, the bolt is done up bloody tight. And number two, even if you've got a powerful air gun or one of them powerful battery operated guns and you get the bolt turning, it will turn very slowly, and there is a chance you could either break the bolt or strip the threads, and that'll be bye-bye engine. We want to remove this crankshaft pulley bolt with no bloody dramas. And if you don't know how I'm going to get this bolt out, it's called a Black & Decker hot air gun. I'm going to hold the head of this gun this far away from the head of the crankshaft bolt for 5 to 6 minutes, and after that time the bolt will whack out. And if you want to know the logic behind this, the heat from this gun getting transmitted down that bolt is going to melt the thread lock, thus allowing the bolt to be removed. One crankshaft bolt and one crankshaft pulley. So now we've undone our crankshaft pulley bolt, it's obviously moved our crankshaft timing out, but what you can do is you can hook a screwdriver in there and get between the engine casing and the teeth of the flywheel, and you can move it back until your paint marks line up again. There's an 8mm bolt holding your crankshaft position sensor. You need to undo that bolt, and then you can remove the crankshaft position sensor and just tuck it out the way. There's another clip holding the wiring onto the casing, which you have to take off as well. There's a further 3 10mm bolts holding the bottom cover in place, 2 from underneath and 1 you can get to from up top. And once them 3 10mm are out, you can get your bottom cover and your crankshaft pickup disc, and you can pull them out the bottom like so. So now we can just loosen our tensioner, 13mm. So with our tensioner totally loosened, we can now jiggle our belt off, and we can just lift the belt straight out. And your tensioner can come clean off now. There is an idler pulley held in by a 16mm bolt, which is just down here underneath this engine mount. That will need to come out, so we can replace that as well. And once that's undone, it will literally just drop out in your hand. Okay, these water pumps, they come with a metal crush fit gasket, so you can only use them once. But also, more interestingly, you've got a little 6mm Allen key, and if you undo that Allen key, you can put a funnel underneath this water pump, take this keyway out and let the water drain out through here, save making a mess on the floor. So with that blanking plug out the way, we can just let that water drain out into a bucket now. And at this point, you can just unbolt the 7 11mm bolts and remove your water pump. And this old water pump I've just taken off is without a doubt been leaking. So we caught that water pump in time. So in our Cambelt box, there isn't really much. One idler pulley, one tensioner, and a new Cambelt. I'm going to stick this idler pulley back on, but you have to use the old nuts and bolts. The new kit doesn't come with any fixings. So we'll pop that bolt in there, and we'll stick this back on. And we'll tighten it up with our 16mm spanner. And that's our idler pulley on. Okay, our tension is pretty straightforward. The centre hole goes through a stud, and the little slot down there, that goes onto a pin on the cylinder head. And then we'll just put the nut on the tensioner stud, just loosely. We can now position our timing pin back through our camshaft sprocket and into the cylinder head. Okay, our crankshaft sprocket is elongated over our woodruff key. All you need to do is make sure that the woodruff key is butting up against the right hand side of the crankshaft sprocket. I'm going to feed this new timing belt from the top down to the bottom. I'm going to start off on the camshaft sprocket and wrap it round the idler and the tensioner pulley, then round the water pump, and last but least we'll wrap the belt round the crankshaft sprocket, making sure that the wood rough key is still butted up against the right hand side of the sprocket. You'll notice a little pin on our tensioner which is holding the tensioner tension to some extent. We're going to pull this pin out now and it will preliminary tension this belt. That's it, you hear that click, and there's the little pin we've just pulled out of our tensioner. So all you need to tighten our tensioner up is a 6mm Allen key which you would turn anti-clockwise. And as you turn it anti-clockwise, this pointer here will line up in the slot here, okay? So these two will come together like so. And once these two are lined up, you then tighten up your 13mm nut which will be here. And that's it, your tension will be done. I thought I'd show you here on the bench because it's a bit difficult to show on the car because there's not enough light and I can't really get the camera in there. Okay, our timing belt is all tensioned up fully now and our timing marks are still lined up. That's good. If they weren't lined up at this point, we could now get our screwdriver in here again and just jiggle the flywheel about until these marks are dead level. On your crankshaft bolt threads, you need to remove all this old thread lock. So we'll give this a good clean up on the bench grinder. Right, now this crankshaft bolt is nice and clean, no more Loctite. And the reason being, I'm going to put some new Loctite on this, but I need this bolt to go back into the crankshaft with the minimum amount of resistance. Now that we've tightened our belt tensioner, you'll see that our crankshaft sprocket is in the centre of our wood rough key here, and there is a small gap either side of our wood rough key, and that's just where we want it. We also know that our flywheel paint marks are lined up and our timing pin is in our camshaft sprocket. So we know that our timing is all lined up perfectly. I'm just going to blow an airline through the crankshaft hole, so if there's any Loctite in there kicking around, I can get it blown out. Right, we'll just shove our lower Cambelt cover back into place. The 3 10mm bolts that are holding this bottom cover on, do them all up finger tight, but do not tighten them up properly. The reason being, the top cover will not line up properly with the bolt holes if you tighten these up. So what I'm saying is, leave them all a little bit loose, then once you've fitted the top cover and fitted all the bolts in the top cover as well, then you can tighten them all up. But we're going to have to put the crankshaft pulley on and tighten the crankshaft pulley up first before we tighten these 2 10mm at the bottom. So we'll put our crank sensor disc in place and position our crank sensor back, 8mm bolt, and we can tighten that up. Now once we put our crankshaft pulley back into position, our little keyway slot here, we'll just jiggle the pulley around till this is round about in the centre. So you can see me just moving that like that. If you just get it roughly in the centre of the slot. Okay, so I'm going to put a bit of Loctite on the threads of this bolt now, and then we'll position this back in our crankshaft. And that's it, one bolt whacked up nice and tight. Now our crankshaft bolt is done up nice and tight. I'm going to turn the engine over 2 full revolutions until our timing pin goes back into our camshaft sprocket. Then we'll check the paint marks on our crankshaft to make sure they're aligned. So as that comes around, I can now fit our timing pin in. Our timing pin goes through our camshaft sprocket and into our cylinder head perfectly. And our timing tensioner, the pointer is lined up with the little cutout. I've inserted our timing pin into the camshaft sprocket and our crankshaft paint marks are perfectly lined up. That's good. Now we know our timing is correct. So that's our cam belt all fitted. Done. Remove our timing pin so we can slide our top cover back into position and whack the 3 10mm bolts in. So now you can tighten down all 6 of your timing cover bolts. This would be a good point to fit a new fan belt. And now just wriggle your engine mounting back into position. Bingo. And stick your bracket back into place. Pop your earth lead back on, bolt that down. And then you can plug all your wires back together. And don't forget the wiring loom clips onto the cover down the back of the engine. Now you can fit your cover back onto your fuel filter. Stick your 3 8mm bolts in there, whack them all down. And don't forget to fit your crankshaft pulley bolt cover and your wheel arch liner. So now there's not much more to do but put the antifreeze in, and you can keep filling this up until it's full. I will say these engines are self-bleeding, so you haven't got to worry about airlocks. You can literally fill these bottles up, start the engine and run it, and they will just self-bleed, no problem whatsoever. Well, that's it then. The coolant's in, the belt's on, it's all tensioned up, all the marks line up. Not much more to do but bark it up and see if it runs. Now all I've got to do is run it until the thermostat opens. Then top the water up once it's cooled down and it can go back on the road. Another Cambelt successfully replaced on a Ford Mondeo Mk5 2Litre diesel. Once you've filled these up with coolant, you can literally screw the cap on and take them for a run up the road until the thermostat opens. Then you've saved a lot of time, because I can tell you now, if you leave this ticking over, it'll take a couple of hours before that thermostat opens. If you blast it up the road, you can probably do it in 15 minutes. Anyway, that's it. Another job done. I'm out of here. Adios.